In the last section, we started talking about some of the big challenges with this next application we're going to be working on. Now again, all these challenges are going to be really coming from the implementation of the API we are trying to use. I want to spend a little bit more time just talking about the API because understanding how it works is going to be really critical for understanding a lot of the code that you and I are going to be writing throughout this application. So just one more section to go over some of these kind of basic ideas around this API. So the first thing I want to review here is that there are going to be two API endpoints that you and I are going to really care about. The first endpoint that we're going to care about is at v0/top stories. So when we issue a GET request to that endpoint, we're going to get back the IDs of all the top stories and absolutely nothing else. All we get are the IDs. Then to get some information about each of those top stories, we're going to make a follow-up request to the item/ID endpoint. And you see right here I put :ID. That's supposed to reflect that we're supposed to put the ID of the story that we want to fetch, like say ID of 60. And that's going to fetch us information about one particular story or comment. Now in the last section, we took a look at this diagram right here. And I had said that, yeah, we're going to make a request to that endpoint. That's going to give us some information or an item model for story number 10. And inside of story number 10 is this kids property, which is going to be a list of integers. And those are IDs of all the comments that are associated with this story. But kind of a little gotcha here. All right, let me tell you what the gotcha is. When I say that these are all the comments on the story, it's just a little bit misleading. You see, kids right here are all the direct comments that have been added to that story. If you go back over to the actual Hacker News website and you click on any of these discussion pages, you'll notice that all the discussions are kind of hierarchical, or they kind of form a structure where someone makes an initial top comment, and then people can make comments on that comment. So when we get back this list of kids that are associated with story 10 right here, these are only the top level comments that are associated with the story. So in other words, that list of kids right there would only have this top level comment right here, and then we can scroll down a little bit and find the next top level comment. Here's the next top level comment, and then the next one, and then the next one. That kids list does not have any of the nested comments that are made as a response to any of the top level comments. So if we want to actually fetch all of the comments that are associated with a story, we end up with a diagram that looks like this. At the very top is the ID of the story that you and I are trying to view. And that story has the kids list associated with it. And so maybe in that kids list are comments or items 288, 959, and 2995. Each of these comments right here have a further list of kids associated with them. And so if you and I want to fetch the entire full comment description that are associated with the story, we're going to essentially have to recursively walk down this structure and fetch all of the nested kids that are associated with this original story. So for every single one comment that exists on a story, we have to make a single HTTP request. And we have to do all of this in a sort of recursive fetching nature, because there's no way for us to just look at story 10 and just magically get a listing of all the comments associated with it. We have to do this kind of recursive fetching methodology. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at a diagram that's going to walk you through exactly what you and I are going to have to really do to make this application happen. So everything's going to start off with the user first starting the application up. Of course, the instant the app starts up, you and I are going to want to show a list of top stories to our user. So right away, the instant the app starts up, you and I are going to make a request to get the IDs of all of the top stories. When we get back the list of IDs, we're going to take every ID and we're going to make one additional request for each one. And that's going to give us some information about each story. So this square right here essentially will get us to this point. It's going to get us everything we need for the home screen. We're going to fetch all the IDs, make one request to get information about each story, and we'll show that all on the screen. Then at some point in time, our user is going to tap on a story so they can see additional information about it. And so at that point in time, we're going to have to look at the story that they just tapped on. We're going to have to look at that list of kid IDs, and we're going to have to make one additional request to get each one of those comments. But it doesn't stop there. For every comment that comes back, we then have to look at each comment. we have to look at the kid property or the kid list on each one of those comments, and we're going to have to make an additional request to fetch each of those comments. And then this step right here is essentially going to be repeated over and over until there are no additional kids for us to fetch. So again, can't say it enough, we're going to have a lot of big issues inside this application tied to the incredible number of requests that we're going to have to make. Now at this point, you might be thinking, Stephen, this API seems crazy. Why would they design it like this? Well, they kind of have a little note in the original API documentation here about that. Somewhere inside of here, yeah, so under design right here, they essentially say like, hey, you know what? It just kind of is what it is. This is the API we're willing to offer. You can use it or you can walk away. So we're just going to use it because it is what it is. Now, one thing I want to make kind of clear here, you and I are going to make all the requests directly from the mobile device because it's going to be a very good learning experience in learning how we can kind of minimize the number of requests that we have to make to that outside API. So we're going to take an approach to this application specifically so you can learn how to manage a ton of requests. But if you and I were making a real application here, not some, essentially a learning project, if you and I were building a real version of this application, we would probably end up with an architecture that looks like this. You and I would have our app running on a mobile device, and then we would probably put together our own custom API. So this would be some outside server that you and I manage right here. And our API would be responsible for handling that tremendous number of requests that go to the Hacker News API. And so by introducing this little middle server right here, our app would be able to maybe just make a single request to our API and get back an entire story with all of its comments. So in other words, if we were doing like a real world application and we wanted to build this the perfect way, we would have our API be responsible for making all these requests rather than our app directly. But again, we're here to learn about Dart and Flutter and about strategies for handling a lot of requests, so we're not going to be building that API. Our app is not going to have it so that we can learn how to really address these big challenges. Okay, so I think that we've kind of gone over the API enough here. If it still is a little bit unclear, that's totally fine because as we go along, we're going to be making a couple of practice requests so that you can see the data that comes across from the API. So at this point, I want you to make sure that you have generated the application that we made like 2 sections ago. You should have a folder inside of your workspace directory now called News. So do make sure that you change inside of here. Do make sure that you start up your emulator and execute Flutter Run, and make sure you get your code editor open because in the next section, we're going to immediately start writing some code. So quick break, make sure you get that set up, put together, and I'll see you in just a minute.